I remember the time my mom took me to get a haircut as a young girl, and she loved it. She loved it. It was short, and I cried. I felt so uncomfortable and a bit shaken because I looked like a boy, and yet I so often felt like a boy. I didn't always love the dresses my mom and grandma thought were so great, those strange frilly dresses. As I got older, I was told by my grandmother that wearing lipstick was essential, and she always asked me why I didn't wear any. Does everyone who's female have to wear lipstick, dresses, and Mary Janes? I was confused by these rules, mostly because I didn't get to choose for myself what felt good. I was all about comfort, big shirts, loose pants, and clothes that didn't hug my body tight. But it was hard for me to be comfortable in myself and in my comfortable clothes because it was clear that my mom and my grandmother did not like my choices. And my mother and grandmother cared so much about clothes, and maybe not all the time so much about me. And well, maybe that's why, despite being a misfit for the prescribed boxes my mother and grandmother and society asked of me, I worked hard to fit in as much as I could. I wanted to wear the same clothes as my peers, celebrate the same holidays, go to the same schools, and make the same social choices. Tuning in to my own unique identity, needs, wishes, and dreams was the exception, not the rule. In short, I was a follower. But sometimes, despite my fears and how hard I worked to conform, I would find myself on my own path, like on my journey to motherhood. As a small child playing house, I always wanted to be the mom of an adopted child. Adoption might be perceived as a less traditional route to parenthood, but somehow I always knew this path was mine. It was a sixth sense that made sense to me. And when I first held my baby in my arms in Wuhan, China, thousands of miles from my mountain home in Colorado, I knew this baby and my arms were a perfect fit. I loved them from the moment I first held them. In China, they gave them the name Shi Jushuang. Their surname, Shi, was the surname of the orphanage, and Jushuang meant double nines. They had been born on the 9th of November and found at the gate of the orphanage 1 month later on December 9th. Double nines. My former husband and I thought a lot about names, and when I held our baby, I knew the name Lily was a good fit. We decided the middle name would be Jushuang to honor their Chinese name and the mystical double nines. We added my ex-husband's very Irish and my very Jewish last names. Some might have thought it was a confusing name, but we didn't want to cut out any of the identities they held. And as my child grew, it became clear that they were so much more than any of these names and identities. My child was boldly expressive, loved sequin outfits, tutus on their head, bow ties on their neck, and belting out songs on their ukulele. They were constantly building things and always amidst hundreds of creative art projects. A vibrant little kid who laughed a lot and enjoyed posing naked in ski boots. At home, they were celebrated. But throughout elementary school, Lily often wandered the playground, searching for connection, and usually only found it with adults who appreciated their keen quirkiness and brilliance. They were a bright star in a sea of white elite normalcy within our mountain community. And being a mom to a magical, bold force took me on a path back to myself beyond small contained boxes. My learning and liberation began the moment that our skin first touched as mother and child. Lily was afraid, and rightly so, just 11 months old and taken into new arms and new places. I was raised in a home that put walls around feelings and uncomfortable with emotional expression. But this child needed to be held in their fear and then later in their expressive exuberance. Mothering Lily in the way they needed to be met and loved brought my guard down bit by bit. My focus was no longer so much on fitting in, but on being a fitting mother for this child. And by striving to be the mother Lily needed, I began to express myself and trust my intuition more. For example, I rarely referred to my child as my daughter when they were little. Instead, I would find myself referring to them as my kid or kiddo, sensing in some way they were far beyond a daughter in culturally normative ways. Kiddo just made sense to me, and I trusted it. And when Lily came home from elementary school one day, lamenting that when they challenged the rules of the Kissy Monster game and declared that girls could kiss girls and found no agreement from their classmates, I joined their side. It made sense to them, and knowing Lily, it made sense to me. And when Lily returned from a class camping trip at the start of 6th grade, marched off the bus, and proclaimed they were going to choose a new name, handing me a list of gender-neutral names I thought were pretty fitting, it made sense to me. Lily was clearly comfortable exploring gender beyond binary constructs and was always creatively engaged with life. So it was easy to meet their excitement with my own, although to be honest, I thought it was just a phase and didn't really think much about it. But within a few days, Lily declared their name was Ash. And well, Ash has been Ash from that day forward. We joke that I named my kiddo a flower and they named themselves a tree. And they have had to be strong like a tree because unlike me, they have never been willing to put themselves into little boxes to stay safe. Maybe as an Asian, queer, Jewish, neurodivergent child, there was no way to fit into that sea of white, hetero, cisgender cultural norms. The costs I negotiated as a child that led me to strive to conform, despite feeling like a misfit, are too steep for Ash. I often think of Anais Nin's famous quote when thinking about me and Ash. And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. Ash would not betray their experience of themselves, even during the hard and lonely years of middle school when kids divided into binaries. And in high school, when they were so much more than their peers could understand, they often chose to be home alone with their own art and ideas. But despite these difficult years, when they lost some of their joyous sparkle, their inner light remained fiercely shining. And they headed off to college, walking boldly into the world as a kind and tough, creative, and insightful symbiotic mix of masculine and feminine. Forever courageous, but the costs have been real. When people talk about pronouns, they will sometimes say, I don't care. I am too tired to talk about pronouns. It breaks my heart to watch my child move in the world and get confronted by challenge after challenge instead of celebration. I wish the risks Ash had to take to blossom did not have to be so high. One moment. And the dangers are not just the societal rejection that I dreaded as a child. In Ash's case, it is also basic physical safety. Ash and I love to travel and take long road trips together around the country, but gender-neutral bathrooms at truck stops are few and far between. I watch as Ash forces themselves into one of the binary bathrooms. The women's restroom might feel safer, but either choice could lead to confrontation or hostility. Often they choose nature as a safer and more natural place for a true rest stop. I don't want to feel tentative and afraid in these unknown spots for Ash and myself, but so often I do. When Ash was young, we used to read a book together called The 3 Names of Me. It was an adoption book that said, when the baby was born, the birth mom whispered a name into the child's ear that only the child and the birth mom knew. Then later, when the child arrived at the orphanage, they received a second name. And then, upon adoption, the third name was given to the baby by their adoptive parents. The 3 Names of Me. I loved this book, and it also hurt to think there was a first time beyond my own knowing of my own child, a child I love more than any other. But I read it to Ash despite the ache in my heart, because I knew it was an important honoring of the complexity of adoption and our family's journey from the very beginning. And in our case, there was a 4th name, Ash. The name my child chose. I don't know how they knew the right name, what God or mystery of nature whispered in their ear. But I am grateful they shared their name with me and with the world. As I mentioned, we joke that I named my child a flower and they became a tree. But when asked, they often will say, my name is Ash, like from a fire. From a fire. If I have one regret as a parent, it is not recognizing earlier the cost on Ash of not finding enough inclusionary spaces where they could find camaraderie and comfort in their unfolding self. I really had little idea of what it meant to raise a non-binary child on top of all the rest of their intersectional identities. So Ash's understanding of self was too often forged in the fire of exclusion, disconnection, and the confusion they encountered. I saw a meme once on social media about what it meant to be non-binary. On one side, there was a space marked between 2 small boxed options, male and female, with an arrow indicating that non-binary was somewhere in between those boxes. And then there was a second image, a picture of many bright stars in a swirling constellation within the galaxy and cosmos, and an arrow indicating that non-binary was somewhere in there. My child is one of those bright, shining stars in an expanding cosmos, and they live their values to the fullest, proud of being a young queer activist who chooses not to hide. And each day they inspire me to be a little bit more daring, a little bit more courageous, even expressing myself on stage today, which really takes me out of my own little box. But when you love your child, you do your best to expand to meet their bigness. Before I end, there's one more thing I want to say. I have heard too many parents who have not had the privilege of parenting a queer or trans child make statements about how I should parent and who my child is supposed to be. Parenting any child is challenging, and I wish those parents would keep their focus on understanding what their own child needs to not only survive, but to blossom. I am a parent of a child that knows themselves quite well, their strengths and weaknesses and areas that need growth. So why are the choices of my kind, compassionate child someone else's business? My child is not asking you to be an Asian, queer, neurodivergent Jewish adoptee. So please don't ask my kiddo to be you or to take your path. Trust that they are in conversation with the truth that has been whispered in their ear. Their job and my job is to be curious and courageous enough to listen and follow our truest paths.